Next, we need to focus on different hierarchies of goals and needs that users have and how that affects our product. The example that I'm going to use for this is Fitbit. If you think that most people care about counting the steps, that would be the most immediate need that users may try to fulfill. However, that's usually not the end goal in itself. Counting steps is nice as an indicator, but that's not really the end goal that people care about. A higher level need to fulfill is that most people who care about the number of steps and how active they are is they want to stay in shape. Now that's a good insight because not only does it inform how to address your marketing and distribution, but it also informs your product portfolio strategy. In the case of Fitbit, they started to offer many more products that fall into this broad category of health and fitness. In this case, they're also selling a scale which is connected to the Fitbit app that you can weigh yourself and see your weight over time along with your number of steps and other health metrics. Going one level higher can really inform your product portfolio strategy and where you want to move with your company. And last but not least, if you go one step higher, in this case, users of Fitbit products maybe just want to be better versions of themselves. This may yet broaden the perspective even more. In this case, just this image shows that they also added breathing and meditation features to their devices, which are not really tied to the sensors that these devices have themselves. So these features don't rely on the step count and they don't rely on the weight. You may take information from the heart rate sensors, but it's really in this case a software feature that addresses those higher level goals of wanting to be a better version of yourself. And it turns out that reducing anxiety and meditation and being more calm are actually important in that sense. Another aspect of products that's really worth mentioning and that's related to the hierarchy of goals and needs is that not all the value that users get from products are explicit. The best example for this is luxury goods. In the case of Rolex, anyone who knows anything about watches will tell you that electric watches, the ones that have batteries in them and that you can buy for $10, are more accurate than a Rolex. However, a Rolex is a very desirable product and it's very expensive and a lot of people spend a lot of money on them. It's not because they tell time in a precise way, but it's because it's a status symbol that communicates something about your own values. Some people also appreciate the materials that go into these watches, but also given the materials in these watches, the price usually isn't justified by itself. Now this has some interesting implications. The first one is that in these categories where users want to express values of their products that are not really directly tied to the utility of the product, sometimes pricing can be counterintuitive. So in the category of luxury goods, sometimes increasing prices can actually make them more desirable and can get more usage in this specific category of particular affluent people. In economic terms, these products are called Veblen goods. Another consideration is how broadly these products are distributed. If you saw some of these products at every Walmart or at every other corner store, they would become less desirable. A more accessible version of this is the way that some companies market their products. In this case, you see one of the initial campaigns for the iPod. If you've noticed, there is no mention of the brand from the producer in this image, but you still recognize it as an Apple ad. If you remember, before Apple started introducing white earphones, all other earphones were black. So when Apple introduced these products, white earphones became a recognizable product feature that became a status symbol. This was actually a way of Apple allowing their users to show the world what products they're using without putting the actual product or brand logo on display. And it's also an interesting thing to think about, particularly when you're dealing with luxury or upscale products, where you actually want your users to be able to display to the people around them what products they're using. Now, how can you actually find out which one of these aspects are interesting to you, what hierarchies of goals are, and whether you're dealing with explicit or implicit utility propositions? So I like to think about this in 3 different categories. The first one is analysis. This means taking any information that's already available on the market, your users or economic trends, and analyzing them in an offline manner. In many cases, this can actually lead to a lot of really good insights. Of course, it's just recycling information that someone else has already collected, but it's usually a good place to start. And it's also a good way to validate some of your initial assumptions. Just to give you one example, market analyses can help you size markets to see if they're particularly interesting, or they can also give you insights into what types of trends are shaping and influencing your user base. The second one is observation. This is already much more involved because in many cases it involves formal user studies or field visits where you actually want to observe how users use products in their own environment. Now, this is extremely important to both validate some of the assumptions that you have and also to get outside of your own head and see how users interact with products. In some cases, you may think, well, we don't have a product yet, so we can't really observe how it's being used. But in that case, I would argue the most valuable thing to do is actually think about what users are currently doing to achieve the same goals, which will show you the next best alternative to your product. Maybe there are already competitive products out there, and you can observe users interacting with these products. In this case, you're not making observations about the product, but you're gaining insights about the needs that you're trying to fulfill. Here's a fun example. When people think about user research, they often bring up the example of Henry Ford coming up with the automobile. The statement is usually, well, if Henry Ford asked users what they wanted back then, they would have said a faster horse, but not a car. This classic example misses the point because you're not really asking users about the product. You're asking them about their needs. In this case, the needs are to get from A to B, and they would like that to be faster, cleaner, and less cumbersome. So you can certainly observe these needs without already having a product. And the last category is ask. Again, in this case, this usually involves doing interviews, either in person or through some remote technology. Surveys are very common, but in many cases flawed because they suffer a lot of biases. If you have the opportunity to actually do trials and prototypes, they're usually extremely powerful. You can also observe how users interact with these prototypes that can even just be mocks of your products. So to recap, it is extremely important to know your users and to think of your users in a really broad sense. Spend time thinking deeply about the different roles that exist in the purchasing lifecycle. Depending on what type of product you have, there may be multiple people involved. Then, really spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the users, influencers, buyers, and deciders need, what their desires are, and what they want to try to achieve. All of your users have goals that they're trying to achieve, and your product really just needs to help them achieve these goals. And, as discussed, there are different hierarchies of those. It's usually beneficial to figure out some of the higher-level goals and not just to stay within the most obvious ones. In many cases, the needs are implicit and not just explicitly stated.